rejected, crushed, shunned, hurt, cast out, unloved. Because of the way they look, because of the things that they've done, because of the questions they ask, and the mistakes that they made. Judged. Judged by the very people they hoped would help them. The people they hoped would accept them, to get them back on their feet. Judged by the people who called themselves Christian. And it made them turn away, turn off, and tune out to the church. If that's the church, if that's Christianity, we count them out. You ever felt that way? David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons did a major study on those who turned away from the church and Christian faith. There's a book called Unchristian. I'd recommend, if you have any interest in this, to read that book. The reason that people left, the reason why people turned their back on Christianity was this. They said when people who had given up on the church and faith thought of Christians, all that came to mind was a bunch of people who were judgmental, prideful, acting morally superior, finding fault in everyone else. People who lacked compassion, lacked understanding, lacked grace towards other people's screws. People who seemed more interested in condemning people than helping people. You see, this problem is getting worse. When they wrote this book, it was better than it is today. And especially true among our young people, the millennials, and now the Generation Z. The statistics are frightening about them leaving the church. So much so that for those millennials and Generation Z, 40% of them currently have asked what religion they are. They check the box for none. You realize that makes them the largest religious affiliation in North America. That group is larger than the Roman Catholic Church, larger than the Baptist, larger than the Adventist Church in North America. 40% of them. So they have no religious affiliation. And the reason, they feel judged. So if a single mother were to come into a church, looking for community, looking for support, wanting to find God, she turns to God's people, thinking that's who will give her a second chance. What do you think she'll hear? In many places, you will hear, shame on you. Or in other scenarios, you'll hear, you shouldn't be an addict. You shouldn't be divorced. You shouldn't drink. You shouldn't be living together. You shouldn't be attracted to people of the same sex. You shouldn't have questions. Bad, terrible, horrible you. You have no business being here among us good people. Philip Yancey tells the story of a friend of his who worked with the down and out in Chicago. And he tells of how a prostitute, in about as bad a shape as she could have been in, came to him. Her health was failing. She wasn't able to even afford food for her 2-year-old child. In fact, with tears running down her eyes, she confessed that she had been renting out her daughter to men to feed her drug habit. Yancey's friend could barely hear the details standing. He sat there in silence, having no idea what to say. But in the end, he asked her if she ever thought of going to church for a while. He'll never forget the look of pure astonishment on her face. And she said, "Church? Why would I ever go there? They just make me feel even worse than I already do." When those people are asked why they feel that way, why they feel like that's the reception they would get, the answer is always the same. First-hand experience. They've been there, they've seen it, they've experienced the judgment. Is that your story? Do you feel from your past experience with church that if you ever fell flat on your face, if you ever shipwrecked your life, screwed things up a little, that the last place you go running with these God's people? You see a lot of churches and a lot of Christians are everything that you fear and everything that you hate. When it comes to our desire for grace, that incredible commodity that sees us for who we really are, not just for our mistakes, not just for our failures and our flaws. Grace. That dispenser of forgiveness. That spirit that restores those who have fallen. So amazing that we sing songs called Amazing Grace. That powerful force unleashed on this planet by Jesus himself. The last place it's often found is with his people. So what happened? Simple, really. We stopped being like Jesus. We stopped being like him. And he went out of his way to tell those who followed him not to judge others. Listen to his words from his most famous talk ever, the Sermon on the Mount. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? The hypocrite. First take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Pretty clear, isn't it? Don't judge. Period. That's God's job, not ours. It's important to understand what Jesus meant by judging others. It doesn't mean that we can't ever make a value judgment. Some things are wrong and some things are right. This isn't about never taking a stand. It isn't about being a moral wimp. Some people think acceptance means mindless affirmation, validating everything, every choice, and every lifestyle. You see, if someone came up to me and said, "I believe the best way to optimize the performance on your laptop, remove your antivirus software, take down your firewall, open up every email attachment, whether you know who it's from or not, download as much free software from any website you can find, and by all means respond to that email from that long-lost Nigerian uncle who just left you $10 million, and all he needs is your account number and password. If you said that to me, I'd say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Is that being judgmental? No. It's not about refusing to believe something, hold to something, or stand for something. It's not about refusing to say that you feel something is right or wrong, good or bad. It's not about giving up thinking, discernment, or wisdom. It's not about never warning someone. You see, if someone you care about is living in a way that's destroying their life, if I don't say anything to them, I don't love them very much. If someone can't see where they're walking, they're about to step off a cliff, and is it judgmental of me to tell them stop? It's not judgmental for me to tell somebody who thinks they're reaching for Visine for their dry eyes that, oh, by the way, you're grabbing a bottle of acid. That's not being judgmental. That's caring enough for somebody to tell them the truth. So what is judgmentalism? Judgmentalism is the practice of personal condemnation. Personal condemnation. John Stott put it this way. He said the judgmental person Jesus is talking about is someone who is a fault finder, who is negative and destructive towards other people, and enjoys actively seeking out their failings. He puts the worst possible construction on their motives, pours cold water on their dreams, and is ungenerous towards their mistakes. A judgmental person makes sweeping assessments of other people. They assign the worst possible motives to them, without any real knowledge of what's going on in that person's life, in their context, or in their situation. They have this kind of pounce and denounce kind of demeanor about them. It's making yourself out to be God, and to take on God's role as a judge. And that's why Jesus said that if you judge others, you will be judged. Because the heart of a judgmental attitude is to assume yourself so morally superior that you can take over God's role in someone else's life. And Jesus said, fine. If you want to do that, go ahead. But expect to be judged by those same standards. God will judge you on a basis of whether or not you measure up to the standard required for judging, which is being God himself. Anybody want to go through that test? I know I certainly don't. Because I'm not God. And if I get judged like I am, I'm going to be an epic failure. I need to see myself for the way that I am. A fellow screw, a fellow struggler, a fellow sinner. Look what the book of Romans says. You may be saying, what terrible people, but you are just as bad. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you're condemning yourself. For you do these very same things. Don't you realize how kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Can't you see how He has been in giving you, how kind He's been in giving you time to turn from your sin? So why do we do it? Why are we so judgmental? One reason is that we're just quick to take offense. It's like we have a giant chip on our shoulder. We're so hypersensitive to other people and what they might do against us. or that we disagree with, or that we don't like. Let me tell you the story of a pastor's wife. You see, there's a woman who got angry with this lady and wrote her this terrible note about why she was angry with her. And here was her reason. When you stopped me in the hall today and asked me how I was doing, and said you had been praying for me, and that you cared about me, and that you hugged me, well, you didn't hug me long enough. You didn't hug me long enough. It's that kind of judgmental spirit. Why we're judgmental. Another reason why we can be judgmental. That we like to rush to judgment with others. Another story from a pastor that illustrates this. This pastor says that back when I was in seminary, I was a pastor of a little county seat church outside the town where the graduate school was. It was a very small church, and the staff was, well, pretty much me. And so there's a woman who called up and was asking for some help from the church because she was sick and had a lot of bills. So I went over to visit her. And I brought another woman from the church to help me assess the situation. And when we showed up at the house, I remember thinking that this woman's hair looked perfect. It was done up so fancy, and it looked like she had just come from what we called in that day the beauty parlor. It looked really good, like expensive good. And then as we walked into the house with her, there was a door open to her room. And there on a shelf, there were these really, really nice looking wigs. Expensive looking wigs. And after talking for a bit, we left. And I said to the woman who had come with me, those were some really nice wigs. And she said, really nice wigs. Those were expensive. And instantly I thought, she didn't need our help. If she can afford the money to spend the money on those wigs, then she's just looking for a handout, trying to use the church. Well, I later came to find out that this woman had cancer. And as part of her treatment was chemotherapy, and she had lost all of her hair. And then a loving friend of hers had purchased these wigs for her so that she wouldn't have to go around bald. And sadly, she had a pastor who was an ass because of a rush to judgment. Do you know what the biggest reason is why we're judgmental? It makes us feel better about ourselves. We act morally superior because we like to feel morally superior. That's why we minimize our own faults and failures and exaggerate everyone else's. It makes us feel better about ourselves. It's how we build ourselves up. And when we highlight the way that someone else is screwing up and we condemn it, we feel better about our own screws. There's a word for that. Hypocrisy. The word hypocrite literally means mask wearer. It's a Greek term that comes from Greek theater. You see, Greek actors would hold up a mask in front of their face and speak from behind it. That's how they played different characters. So a religious hypocrite is someone who deliberately sets out to deceive people about who they really are. They live life behind a mask. Their spirituality is theater. It's make-believe. A role they're playing out to others. And the heart of that action is elevating themselves as if they are righteous and tearing other people down as if they are the bad guys. But when the mask falls off, and we see who they really are, what do we find out? They were doing the very things they were condemning other people for doing. That person who condemned somebody for pornography was hooked on pornography. The person who said, don't sleep around, was sleeping around. That's why Jesus hated it so much and called it for what it is, hypocrisy. Take another look at that passage. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye. Philip Yancey wrote a book on Jesus and grace. And he made a telling observation. He noticed that with Jesus, there are only two categories of people. There are sinners who admit that they are sinners. And there are sinners who deny that they are sinners. Only two groups. Sinners who admit that they are sinners receive his grace and his compassion and his forgiveness. The sinners who don't get the judgment that they are dealing to other people. Jesus came to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. You see, the Christian life isn't about pretending that you have it all together when you don't. It reminds me of something that Will Campbell once wrote. Will Campbell was known for his disarmingly earthy approach to spirituality and life. He was once asked this question, in 10 words or less, what's the Christian message? Could you give it in 10 words or less? Here's what he answered. He said, we're all bastards, but God loves us anyway. Very much sums it up there. If Christianity is about anything, it's about serious imperfection that desperately needs forgiveness and grace. It's not having our act together. It's admitting that we don't have our act together. And then coming to Christ for a relationship built on grace and forgiveness. And then becoming who we were really meant to be. So let me set something straight here and now. This church, Triad Adventist Fellowship, is led by a sinner. Come spend a day with me, and I guarantee you I will disappoint you. I love Amy with all my heart, but you would see how I fail daily in being the husband that I am supposed to be. I love God and urge others to do the same. But if you want to see someone who fails to consistently live in the light of what he knows about God and how he ought to live, I'm the man. But the truth runs even deeper than that. As a Christ follower, I remain a sinner who struggles with sin, and often, daily, I lose that battle. All Christians do. I remember reading about the life of Alexander White, who was a Christian leader in 19th century Scotland. He was once approached by a woman who showered praise on him and his life. Listen to how he responded to her. Madam, if you knew the man I really was, you would spit in my face. Does that mean that all Christians are counterfeits? Or that the Christian life and faith is meaningless? No, it doesn't. You see, I screw up 1,000 times a day. But I'm more like Jesus now than I was 5 years ago. In so many areas of my life. And the life I'd be living apart from him is almost unthinkable. It just means that we all have the exact same sickness and disease. We're all in the same hospital for treatment. Some of us are further along the path of recovery than others. Some of us are better at following the prescribed treatment than others. But we all have the same disease. We're all being treated for a sickness called sin. We're all in some kind of recovery. So whatever you brought with you today, you're not alone. And we here at Triad Adventist Fellowship will not condemn you. You're no different than any of the rest of us who are struggling with areas of temptation and desire. We have all failed. But Christ is working on us. TAF, Triad Adventist Fellowship, is nothing but a colossal collection of moral facts. You're in some bad company. This is the first time you're here, I'm sorry, but you're in some bad company here today. We have sins of pride, greed, pornography, self-righteousness, lying, stealing, adultery, insensitivity to others. You name it, that sin is in this building. Chris mentioned last week about our natural church development score, about how it's top 3% of all churches, regardless of denomination, all over the world. So how's that score, which shows that we're a healthy church, how in the world are we a healthy church? All these problems. You see, it's through the power of Christ. There's hope for all of us. And it's accepting that makes us a healthy church. Here's what else you need to know. We want to expose these areas in our life. Not to deny them or rationalize them away. Not in a way that condemns us, but in a way that transforms us. We want to discover them. Go to God and ask for forgiveness and become increasingly changed people. I read about how this one church decided to make it as clear as they could. And each week in their bulletin, they put this: we extend a special welcome to those who are single, married, divorced, filthy rich, dirt poor, no habla inglés. You're welcome here if you're just browsing, you just woke up, or you just got out of jail. We welcome soccer moms, NASCAR dads, starving artists, tree huggers, latte sippers, vegetarians, junk food eaters. We welcome those who are in recovery or are still addicted. We welcome you if you're having problems and you're down in the dumps. Or if you don't like organized religion. If you blew your offering money at the dog trap, you're welcome here. We welcome those who are inked, pierced, or both. We offer a special welcome to those who could use prayer. Had religion shoved down your throat as a child, or you got lost in traffic and ended up here by mistake. We welcome seekers and doubters. We welcome you. And you need to know, that's what marks this place, this church. You see, I can't speak for every church, but I can speak for this one. You need it, and I need it. The world tells us to live this life like we're playing a huge game of hide and seek. Everybody hide, because if you want to come out and you're found, you will be rejected by others. You will be judged, condemned. So hiding as long as you can is how you play the game. See, Jesus wants church to be a place where a huge collective "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free" is shouted to the top of our lungs. It's time to be found. It's safe to be found. But it's time to come home. Find acceptance, forgiveness, and truth, and grace. You want that? Around here, we do. It's marked us from day one at Triad Adventist Fellowship. Let me end with a story. You see, there was a young woman and her roommate who were in college. And these girls were the epitome of party girls. One of them got pregnant. They were locked over. They didn't know what to do. So they said, well, why don't we try and go to church? So they did. They randomly picked some church that was near the campus. They went and they started to attend for a few weeks. But then people found out what their story was. Found out that one of the girls was pregnant. She received a visit from the pastor of that church. He said, "You're not welcome here. You're not ours." And they walked away heartbroken. They left thinking that God's clearly not the answer. That God's people are clearly not the answer. And then a couple weeks later, they got a flyer in the mail about a new church opening up. And they thought, we should give it one more try. One last chance. They went to that church. And I imagine it was a church much like we have here at TAF. They came, and within 6 weeks, both of them had given their lives to Christ. They were baptized. Now, the girl who got pregnant ended up moving away for job reasons, but the other girl stayed. Introduced to a man there at church, they got married, had 3 kids, all of whom were baptized in that church. She ended up joining the staff at that church, becoming one of the senior leaders there. She was almost lost. She was almost lost because of judgmentalism. Almost lost because of everything that Jesus is not about. Why do I tell you that? Because we're imperfect. There's all kinds of stuff around here that people are dealing with, starting with me as a leader of this church. But one thing I guarantee you, we will love each other. There's radical grace and acceptance here in this church. You can come here with your junk and your questions, explore what God would have for your life. And you will not be condemned here. You will be challenged, but you will be accepted and loved and not condemned. And who knows, maybe one day I'll have the privilege of baptizing you, or maybe even your children. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, help this place to be your sanctuary. Help this church to be a place where no one is condemned, where everyone is accepted, where everyone grows closer to you, Lord. Fill this place. Help us to be known as a place where radical grace and love is always found. In your Son's name.